want to talk about Pastor John Nelson, a.k.a. Little Man. I've been knowing Little Man all my life. Little Man was part of the community that I grew up in. He was older than I was, but I worked with Brother John for many, many years at the paper mill here in Ashdown, and we became fishing buddies. I wanted to learn a lot about fishing and boats and different things, and so he taught me the river and everything that I needed to know to be able to become a navigator myself. And we got to know each other, but before that, he was one that I had admired for many, many years before he and I became best friends. He did a lot of musicals at the last was called Jamboree, but it was just the old theater. And he would have the Jackson Southerners. He would have all kinds of great groups. He spun records at the radio station every Sunday evening, and that's how he got to be known as the person that was singing the lead in the Skylarks quartet. And he was well known all over for raising funds for needy causes, such as people that had homes to burn. And he would have a musical and invite all these great quartets down and raise all the money and give it to that person that needed that help if they had a house to burn. He also helped a lot of people that was just needy, and a lot of folk didn't know that, but that's kind of what drew me to him as a person. Now, some things I didn't find out about Brother John was that his earlier life was in his gospel group with some things about what his ambitions were in life, until he shared them with me later on, that he was just a gospel singer, he said. And he had some people from the paper mill where we worked at wanted to go to a revival that they had heard about, people that had been getting saved, and so to speak. And he knew nothing about being saved and born again as Pentecostals do, but even the people that was from his sect of religious belief, which was being a Baptist, they was curious. And so they asked him in the Skylark bus, would he take them to DeQueen, Arkansas, where this evangelist was doing these revivals, where he was at that time, but he had ran them all around Foreman and Oklahoma and Texarkana and other places, Nashville. And when he went to DeQueen, they had heard about it, and they asked Little Man, would he take them in the Skylark van? And so Little Man said, yeah. He told me, so I told him I'd take them. He said, but I didn't go in. He said, I waited outside. He said, and it was in there so long, keeping up all that noise and racket. He said, I had to go check to see if they was about ready to go. He said, and I stuck my head in and peeped and said, the evangelist asked me, could he pray for me? And he said, and the little man hesitated. He said, yeah. And so the little man said, I stepped inside the door, and he came down the aisle and laid hands on me and prayed for me, and he prophesied to him. So he told him, said, you'll never be the same. He said, and God is calling you to preach. And the little man said, yeah, all right. So little man said he left it alone, and said after that, he said, this is what he told me after he and I became good fishing buddies, because I didn't know this until he would start sharing stuff with me. And he was sharing about how that ever since after that, he go fishing by himself sometime, and he began to talk to the fish. And he kind of characterized it as, I end up preaching. He said, I would begin to sing, telling the fish, y'all better come on out of there, better come on out of there. He said, and I would be trying to catch them crappie and be telling them, come on out of there, come on out of there. He said, the next thing I know, I would be, he said, I guess I would be preaching. And he said, I don't want you to tell nobody about this. And so I didn't tell nobody about it, but he shared it with me and said that, he said, what is that? And so me being a part of Pentecostalism, and I understood, and the gentleman that prophesied to him was a well-known evangelist by the name of Lawrence Braggs. And Lawrence Braggs was phenomenal back in that day. He was a traveling evangelist that spoke things, a prophet, and he would say things to people, and it came to pass. And so I told him that's what it was. I said, and what he did was prophesied over your life was something that he saw, and now God is bringing it to pass. I said, even though it's you preaching to the fish, I said, but he's making you a fisherman of men as well. And that was very profound to him. And so one thing he asked me was, during that time, he said, this is before starting of the church at the Brown School. He asked me, he said, you reckon your pastor would mind if I come up and sit in some of you all's services and kind of get an idea of how church supposed to go? I said, I asked him. And so that happened. So I told him what the pastor said. The pastor said, sure, come on, tell him, come on. So he sat in the pulpit, and pastor honored him because he felt like he was called through one of our friends, Lawrence Braggs. And little man would always show his appreciation by getting up and singing a song. And he just floored the whole church. I was at Freedom Temple, Church of God in Christ there at Foreman, Arkansas, and they all fell in love with Pastor John, that we only knew as little man. He had never got called into ministry or even went before the board to actually say he was wanting to be a pastor. But he was trying to learn his way of what God was calling him to do. And everything he would do, he'd run it past me. And he had a lot of people he was running stuff past, but mostly I was his fishing buddy. And we'd get on the lake and we'd be with Doc Gully, and Doc Gully would be spurting off stuff, but little man would be asking more questions about ministry, and he was collecting this information. And so he collected enough information to where he said, what would I need, Jones? He said, to start a church. And I knew my theology. I told him, I said, based on Pentecostalism now, I said, now Baptist is a totally different ministry. I said, it's a congregational ministry. I said, and we are a Trinity ministry, which is ran by bishops and superintendents and pastors. I said, but the congregation actually, he said, well, what do I need? I said, you don't need but 3 or 4 things. I said, you, your wife, a secretary, and you need a deacon or 2. And I said, you can start a church like that, and you can start it on your porch in your house. I said, and we talked about the Brush Arbor days and stuff like that. And so he kind of got a grasp of what church was. And he said, well, what else I'm gonna need? He said, I want to build a church. And I said, well, that's going to be a hard one. He said, how hard is it? And so I told him you'd have to have some land. I said, that's the very first thing you have to have. And he asked some more questions about what else we needed. But first of all, he had to get some land. So he finally found some land. Come back and we were fishing. He told me, he said, I got some land, John. I said, where you get land from? He said, your brother-in-law. He said he had been buying some land from Charles Henderson, and he didn't pay him down Miss Bessie Bennett's house, and the old house. I said, yeah, I know the house. And he said, Charles Henderson gave that to me. And I said, he said, what do I need now? I said, well, you need some plans. And just so happened to be God had put him with me, and I was pretty much artistically inclined. And I drew up the plans for our church, which is identical to this church at here at Free Will. Only thing, the difference between this church and the one that I designed for Pastor John was that it's 10 foot bigger in circumference, all the way around. That's what he wanted. He said, I've been to y'all's church. He said, I've been there for 2 or 3 weeks learning. He said, and I wanted 10 feet bigger all the way around. So that's what I done. I drew him up plans, and he said, what's next? I said, well, we have to get this plan taken to a building material place. And we got to get a cost. How much it's going to cost to build this facility? And we started building a folder with all the things such as the blueprints, the cost and everything, and down to every plug, every socket, every switch, every light where he wanted them at. And he said, I want it just like the one you got at the church. So we made the design of all the lighting and everything in here just like the one at Foreman that he had visited our church. And he said, well, where do I do it now? So I told him, I said, we have to take it to a building material place. And we had took it to a place there in Texarkana, and they gave him a cost of all the materials that would put this building in the dry. And once we got that cost, he said, what we do now? I said, now you're gonna need 2 deacons or 3 to go to the bank with you. I said, and you're gonna need yourself and the secretary to be write up minutes of meeting that you have to have. I said, that's my knowledge of it. And he said, I can get that done. So he got that done, and he said, what to do? I said, you got to have your deacons now. I said, you can go by yourself. The secretary had to go. She just had to sign, which it was your mom. And so I guess she signed, and he said, well, I got to go find me some deacons. So now the 2 people that he found, they was people that he had knew on the job and then knew in life, which was people that was from the community there at Richmond where he was raised up here back in there. And he went and found a guy by the name of Rufus Deloney. And he found another guy had been living in California that he had known all his life by the name of Albert Britt. And Albert had been living on the streets in California, and he was here in Ashdown for a while. And so he took him to Benny Ray's barbershop and got Benny Ray to get his hair all cut up and real nice and neat shaved. And then he went down to Walmart and bought Albert some clothes. But knowing Rufus was already self-made, he could be clean as he wanted to be. And so he got both of them to go down to the bank with him. And he went down and sat down before the banker. And this is what he told me on a fishing trip we went on. He said, Joan, he said, I went down and did just like you said. He said, I had my 2 deacons, one sitting on the left, one sitting on the right. He said, I felt kind of like Jesus. I had 2 thieves on both sides. He said, I went down there. He said, and the banker asked me, what did I want? And he said, I laid that folder me and you had put together. He said, I laid it down. And the banker looked at it and he kept saying, He folded through it and looked at everything, all the itemization of what it take to put it in the drive. And putting it in the drive meant putting the frame up and everything and all of the ceiling and the roofing and stuff except for the inside and the furnishing. So that was $40,000 that it was going to take us to do that roughly. And so he went down and he gave it to him and the man kept saying, I said, well, what did he say? He said, after he got through, the first thing he asked me, we were sitting over there looking at him across the desk. And he asked me, said, when you want it? And the little man said, he looked at them 2 that were with him and said, right now. He said, well, I'll put it in your account. That was how simple it was. And I often have said that what it took for people sometime 20 and 30 years to do, he did it in 1 year. We built this church and put it in dry for $40,000. Many of the people during the infrastructure of this, trying to get it done, he had started a mission at the Brown School. And we had built a platform which was 2 by 6 high and pretty wide, but I had made him a pulpit compodium. We fixed it up very nice, carpeted it and everything, and he got all of the instruments that he needed for the platform, the PA system, everything. And he kind of got weary of that because the people that was coming was kind of dragging their feet on him. And he was really wanting to be in a hurry about building this building after he found out that he could get it done. And so he incorporated me, Brother Charles Norcross, and a few others, Brother Henry White, and Mr. B.F. Turner was our master carpenter, and several others that worked with him that came in to help out. And so Mr. Turner asked me, was I going to be running this job? I said, no. I said, Brother John little man is going to be running the job. I said, but we're going to be helping him. And so one day we was trying to get this off the ground and get things done. He said, Jones, make sure that this is on grade out here. And when they do this foundation, we had Mr. Jones, who was one of the guys, not Arthur Jones, but the white guy, Jones, I can't think of his name. He was the one who did the slab. John Smith was the inspector at the time. He did a lot of houses in this area back in the day. And he had kind of owed Pastor John a curve. He let us come in here and done the dirt on Miss Bessie Bennett's old place after the house was tore down and cleaned up, and let us done this without a permit. And so we was getting ready to pour concrete. They had set the batter boards and dug the footings and everything ready to pour concrete. Mr. John come and put a stop to it and said we couldn't do it because we didn't run this through the state health department. And we was at odds about that because I was over the project while Pastor John was working. And I called him and told him at work what was going down, that we couldn't pour the slab. And he said, give me a minute, he said, and I'll call you back. And so what he done was call me back and told me later on, he said, Charles Henderson's gonna come by there in just a minute. I just called him. So Charles Henderson was a very instrumental person in trying to get this off the ground from the very beginning, because they had kind of stacked the deck against us on building the foundation, because I found out later that it was customary for them to tell us to get the state inspection done so that they could approve the permit. And he didn't do that on purpose. And I know Mr. John Smith knew that, but he knew that was going to be the thing that stopped us from pouring. Concrete was on its way. Pastor John's at work. I'm straw boss in the operation. Everybody was ready. Mr. Jones, the guy that was doing the foundational stuff, had his people there ready. But he'd come and put a tag on our project and said, we need a permit. Couldn't do no pouring. So Charles came with an ace in the hole. He come and he said, what's going on? And I told him exactly what happened. He didn't tell us about the permit, running it through the state. I said, but he should have told us that. We would have done that. And he said, wait just a minute. He said, I'll be back in a few minutes. He went home and he got on the phone, I suppose, and called a few people in Little Rock. And he called the state health department and got to the head man in the state health department and told him what I had told him about me and Pastor John had done, and that the inspector kind of didn't tell us that. And so I don't know what Charles did or what he said to the man, but he got results. So when John got off from work and came down and we went up to the office up there, Mr. John Smith, which was the inspector at City Hall, he got down there. Before we could get in the door, he told us to go on back. Y'all got the green light. By the way, who gave y'all that telephone number? Little man said, that's all right. We got it. So we came back and we poured the slab, and from there then on, we put it in the dry for $40,000. A lot of the naysayers said we wasn't going to do it because it was just us, a few community guys, Brother Norcross, myself, Mr. BF, and the people that helped him. Henry came by later, but it was mostly people that came with Mr. B.F. Turner, his family members, people that knew him, that he worked with all the time. But whenever Pastor John was working, I was kind of like the straw boss around here to make sure things, and call him if anything needed done. Mr. Turner asked us one thing before he got the project started, and this would be probably the end of this session of it. He asked me, he said, John, he had an old piece of stick in his mouth. He said, what are you and Norcross charging Nelson to help him? I said, nothing. And so he asked, Norcross, what you charging? And Norcross said, not a doggone thing. And so he walked off and got in his old van and took off. So that Saturday he came to work. And he told everybody to work with him. He was going to work for $5 an hour. And everybody that worked for him, helped on this project, going to have to work under $5 an hour. So that's how it went down. Anybody that didn't do what he said, they got fired. In particular, one person, I ain't going to call the name, but he did get fired. Every time that Mr. Turner would tell us on the roof and some of the other stuff, what to do, how to cut it, how to do it, this person would come back and tell him to do it a different way. And so when Mr. Turner would come back, he would find it done a different way. Joan, who told y'all to do that? I said, I didn't. Somebody else told him. And who? And he told him, this person that told him. He said, when Nelson get here, you tell him to come see me. And so when little man got off from work that day, I told him, I said, serious, little man. I said, Mr. Turner's pretty upset. I said, and I told him why. And he said, what is it, Mr. Turner? Little man always licked his tongue out. He said, what is it? And he said, tomorrow, it's either me or that other fella. He said, he gonna run this operation or I'm gonna run it. He got in his van, they took off and left. And so little man went up there, he said, come here. I guess he was kind of like Donald Trump. He said, you fired. He fired him off the job. And consequently, they're talking about firing, I'm going to end this session of it. He also fired one other person. But Mr. Turner fired him. And it was somebody that was putting tacks in the roof in the center of the trough. And Mr. Turner had to come around and look at it and inspect our work up there. And he said, who putting these tacks in this trough? And all of us was kind of like professionals at putting shingles on, so he kept asking. He said, who put these on? So little man said, I did. He said, hey, you put these on down here? He said, yes, sir. He said, come here. He said, bring your hammer. He said, yes, sir. He said, give me that hammer. He took little man's hammer and he throwed it off the roof on the ground. He said, like, go down there where it is. Don't come back up on that roof. So he fired little man off the roof. So